Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here. I always laugh when I see my name up on a screen and it says Bo Stern-Brady, Bo Stern-Brady, because it's so neat and clean. Like it represents so much, but it just looks so little. There's a little tiny hyphen there. But I'm telling you what, that hyphen tells a big story. Like on one side of the hyphen, I'm the mom of 4 kids, and on the other side, I'm the mom of 10. Happy Mother's Day to me, actually. My kids all got together yesterday for Mother's Day, and they cooked brunch, and it was fabulous. Like, they made crepes and things. So if you're a mom who today got Doritos and M&Ms and a Mountain Dew on a tray with a flour, your day's coming. They're going to grow up, and they're going to cook well, and that's the reason you stick with them. That's the reason, Brogan, we don't send them back, because someday they're going to cook for us. So, on one side of the hyphen, there's a lot of brokenness, and there's sickness, and there's pain, and joy, and all kinds of things. On the other side, there's new life, and hope, and a new marriage, and redemption. And I find that stories are more compelling to me than almost anything else. I love a good story. You know what I don't love? I don't think I've ever once taken a rainy Saturday and wrapped up in a napkin and snuggled up on my couch with my dishwasher instruction manual. I just want to see what makes this baby work. I want to know the instructions. So I take it a little bit personally when people say the Bible is an instruction manual. No, it isn't. The Bible is a grand, epic narrative of something that was launched at the garden and will culminate in a new garden, in a new creation. The Bible is not even a book. The Bible is 66 books, each one with a plot line and characters and details that are all pointing toward one grand, big, incredible story. One grand culmination. They're all pointing to a cross and a tomb and an ascension and a new heavens and a new earth. And so when we come to a narrative book, especially, some of the books of the Bible are not very narrative. They're not easy to tell a story from. Numbers, for instance. That's when we all bail on our Bible reading plans. Like, I don't think I want to read this. Some tell a beautiful story, a whole story. And the book we're looking at today is the Book of Esther. It's nestled in between, I think, Ezra and Nehemiah. Is that where Esther's found? Or Job and Nehemiah? Job and Ezra. That's where it is. I need to sing the song in my head to get to it. But it's this book that tells the story, and it's the story of so much intrigue. It's beautiful, but it's also really mysterious. It's got a lot happening. It takes place 100 years after the Babylonian exile. So around the year 600 BC, 597, I think exactly, the children of Israel are taken away captive into Babylon. And you can read about the fall of Jerusalem in 2 Chronicles and 2 Kings. It's this really devastating thing where a whole nation falls, and now they are just sort of this subservient group of people that are gathered together in a city they don't belong in, where they don't have the same, their names are changed, their identities are messed with, and they are there. And then we remember the iconic scripture that we all have cross-stitched on a pillow, Jeremiah 29:11, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a future and a hope. That is spoken to them. That word is spoken directly to them in their captivity. But like 2 verses ahead of that, God says to them, after what? 60 years. After 60 years of captivity, then you're going to figure it out that I had a future and a hope for you all along. And so he tells them, settle in. Build houses, plant gardens, let your kids get married, make businesses. And he says, pray for the peace of the city where I've called you away captive, because as you prosper, so will the city prosper. And you know what happened? That. They dug in. They built businesses. They built families. They built dynasties. They grew some power inside their captivity. And then 60 years later, just as God predicted, King Cyrus sets them free and says, you can go back and rebuild Jerusalem. He even resources them to do it. And when he does this, only 50,000 want to go. Most of them are really settled into their captivity and they're happy to stay. And so this is where we find the book of Esther. It's the king of Persia, the kingdom of Persia, and Esther is an orphan girl who has remained. Her cousin Mordecai is someone who seems to have some sort of influence in the kingdom, but they're here. Many have returned to Jerusalem, but they have stayed, and this story is going to contain so many crazy things. There's going to be a 6-month party. There's going to be a 4-year beauty contest. There's going to be an evil villain and a humble hero. So many things inside this book. So I want to just review it real quick for those of you who need an Esther refresher today, which is kind of a cool term. So they are there, and it opens in a party at a palace. It's the palace of King Xerxes of Persia. The palace is in the city of Susa, and listen to how the author describes it. We don't, by the way, know who the author of Esther is. It says, the garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of, I don't know this word. I'm going to skip it or make something up. Marble. That's it's marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions. This sounds like it's going to go well, yeah? For the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Women weren't actually invited to this party until they were. So this is an interesting description of this palace in Susa. A man named Jacques de Morgan actually excavated the palace in Susa in the year 1897. It took him 12 years to get all the stuff out. And so a lot of the stuff that they found in the excavation process exactly matches this passage in the book of Esther. And in fact, most of the stuff was hauled away to the Louvre in France. For years, all of the stuff from the palace of Susa was on display in the Louvre. And so King Xerxes is having a party. It was an opulent kingdom. It was outlandishly opulent. And he's having a party that lasts 180 days. And this is our first glimpse into what kind of character this king is going to be. Because what kind of king has 6 months to party? Like, he's got nothing else on his to-do list. He's like, the kingdom can pretty much run itself. It's going to be fine. And then we'll just do drunken debauchery for like 180 days. And then after 7 days of drinking, they've run out of things to do. And so the king calls his wife Vashti to come and stand before his drunken friends. Historians believe he probably wanted her to come and stand before them naked. And she says no, and I applaud her for this decision. But it gets her vanquished. And so he kicks her out of the kingdom. In fact, it's an interesting little passage. I'm not going to read the book because it will take us too long, but please go back and read this story this week because it is so interesting. He gathers together a few of the men of the kingdom, and he says, what should we do? And they're like, if you don't handle this, all the wives are going to want to not stand before the drunken men naked. So you're going to have to really get Vashti under your thumb here. And so he sends her away. And then the same guys who tell him it's a good idea to vanquish her tell him it's a great idea to hold a beauty contest for the next one. Let's just gather all the single women of the kingdom, and they go through a year of preparation before they get one night with the king because they are lucky, lucky girls. And they are going to have a tryout to be the queen. And in the process here, we run into this man named Mordecai. Mordecai is a Jew. In fact, his title often in the story, people who aren't him always refer to him as Mordecai the Jew. And I think this is going to prove significant for us later on. Mordecai talks to his cousin Esther. Esther is a beautiful orphan. Now, Esther, in this culture, she is a second-class race. She is a second-class gender, and she is an orphan. Sister's got no resources. She got nothing to bring to the contest. But Mordecai says, this is your chance maybe to turn it around. And I have this thought, I think Mordecai seems enough involved in the running of this government that he probably isn't so hopeful that Esther will be the husband to the king. But I think Mordecai knows something is happening in the story right now that it would be good for her to be queen. And so she does it. She listens to the instructions of the king's staff and also to Mordecai, who tells her, you need to hide the fact that you're a Jew. So Mordecai the Jew tells his cousin, you need to hide that part of your story. Put that part away for now. And so she goes in and she meets with the king and she wins. I mean, if anyone has ever watched The Bachelor, this feels the same to me as the girl who wins it. Like, great. You got a prize there. Sorry if you love that. So the king falls in love with her, though. I mean, the king is really taken with her. And oh, you know who's not in this story at all? God. No, this is I think, the only book in the Bible where God is never mentioned. He's not ever in the text. But if we look at it carefully, we're going to see his fingerprints in every moment of it. We're going to see divine reversals. We're going to see plots turn. We're going to see heroes raised up and villains. We're going to see so much, and we see God at work here. So I don't think Esther and Mordecai have any idea where this story is going to go. All they know is we're going to take the next step. So Mordecai overhears a plot to kill the king, and he reports it, which earns him a sort of IOU from the king. And they record this in the Book of Chronicles, which is something, not the chronicles of our Bible, but there was a chronicle that the king kept of good things people had done, sort of like a ledger of who needs to be honored. And so the story is going great for Mordecai and Esther. Mordecai's kind of a hero. Esther is queen, and both are living in the glow of the king's favor. And then, you know what comes into the story? The same thing that comes into every story. A villain. I mean, think for just a minute. If there was a villain in your story, who would it be? Because honestly, do we want to go to a movie where we go and the people from the first screen live happily ever after? No, we do not. We want to see something happen. We want a villain. We want an inciting incident. We want to be mad at somebody. We want to throw a punch at somebody, or we want to see somebody throw a punch at somebody else. And so this story has a villain, and he is a worthy one. His name is Haman, and he is a bad guy. Interesting in Esther, if you take the time to read it, mark in your Bible how many times someone bows to someone else physically. Someone bows down to someone else, because it's a lot. I was surprised when I reread it as I was studying for this. It's a lot of bowing. It's a lot of coming before someone. It's a lot of reverence. And anytime in our stories as they play out, anything that we bow to is automatically the main character of the story, even just for that day. That's just how it is. And so if in a moment I bow to fear, fear is the main character in my story. And so I don't want to bow to anything in my life that I wouldn't want to be said at my funeral. The main character of Bo's story was, she was pretty scared all the time. I just don't want it to be that. So Haman wants everyone to bow to him, convinces the king that's a good idea. Mordecai won't do it, and Haman hates him. In fact, Haman hates him so much that his wife convinces him to build a pole 50 cubits high, 6 stories, to impale him on. That's a really bad death. I mean, that'd be really bad. And so he then comes to the king, and he convinces the king, I want to kill all the Jewish people. And we should just kill them all. They're all out to get you. And again, the king is he's not very informed. He's not very intelligent, it would appear. And so he easily does it. He hands over his ring. He hands over all his authority to Haman. And Haman convinces him, we're going to kill them all in one day. In fact, the king and him throw a dice to figure out when they're going to kill them, which is just so callous and awful, this idea. And the dice in that language is called a pur. And so the Feast of Purim is what the Jews eventually call this event. So Mordecai goes into mourning for his people when he hears this. It says all of the kingdom hears about this, that the Jews are all going to be killed on one day. And he is sackcloth and ashes and fasting, as is their custom. There is no hiding who he is or his feelings about what is going to happen here. I actually love this about the Jewish culture, this full demonstration of their sorrow. A full body, full throttle, all the way into lament. And so this is what they do. They're living in sackcloth and ashes. And then listen to this scripture. It's Esther 4:4. When Esther's maidens and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, the queen was overcome with distress. She sent clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Now, can we talk for a minute about this idea that all of her people have just received a death sentence, but she is so caught up in the palace where it's safe and beautiful, where the golden goblets are, where she's the queen, that she doesn't know. She doesn't know what's going on. She is so caught up in the palace that, listen, she has no idea what's happening in the kingdom. And so because she doesn't know what's going on in the kingdom, because Esther for this moment has lost the plot line of the story, she sends Mordecai clothes. And that's silly. He's not wearing sackcloth because he didn't have laundry day. He's not wearing sackcloth because there's nothing else in the closet. It means something else. And she sends him the wrong solution. And it will always happen to us. If we lose our place in the story of God, if we start to get focused on all kinds of things, if we get caught up in our pretty churches and our easy things and our lined up rows, and we forget to pay attention to what is going on in the whole kingdom, we're going to end up telling the wrong story. It's not going to land. It's not going to help. And it's not going to compel anyone in. The worst thing we could do is reach out to the needs, the gaping needs in our world right now with a dishwasher instruction manual. This will solve your problem. Page 37 is right there. Don't overload. So, she sends him the wrong thing, and we will too. She sends him clothes. She misses the point. And so then Mordecai and Esther trade notes back and forth about the situation. She knows that the king has not called her. She knows the king has not called to her in for 30 days. He hasn't wanted to see her for 30 days. She also knows that if she approaches him without him calling her, she'll be killed. That's the penalty for that. But Mordecai tells her, and this is one of the most iconic passages ever from this book. He says, do not imagine that because you are in the king's palace, that you alone will escape the fate of all Jews. He's telling her, this is still your story. You don't get to change who you are. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows if perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go and assemble all the Jews who can be found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my maidens will fast as you do, and then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. What we are witnessing here is a woman who has just rediscovered the plot, and she is stepping into it, and it is beautiful. So Esther approaches the king, and he's super happy to see her, and he promises her anything up to half the kingdom. And I wonder if there could have been a big gulp in Esther at this moment, not the drink, like a big, oh my goodness, half the golden goblets, half the curtains, half the opulence, half the money. What could I do with half the resources of this kingdom? Imagine how many people in sackcloth I could clothe with half the resources of this kingdom. But instead, she understands, no, what I need from you is not your money. What I need from you is your time. And so she asked him to have dinner, and she says, hey, bring along Haman, that nice guy. Bring him with you. And so the king and Haman have dinner with Esther. And at the end of it, he says, what do you want up to have my kingdom? He gives her another chance to change her story, but she sticks to the plot, and she says, nope, I want one more dinner with you. And at that time, Haman blows it. The plot is revealed. The king is furious. The king has Haman impaled on the pole that he built for Mordecai. And they do a reversal, and they make a way for the Jews to protect themselves, and everyone is saved, and the story, and they all live happily ever after. I actually don't know if they live happier ever after. I just know that's where the story ends. But the thing about Esther is that we really can find from it, we're not going to find in the book of Esther doctrine. We're not going to find a list of rules. We're not going to find 4 spiritual laws. Have you ever had someone want to get you saved and start with the book of Esther? They pretty much don't. Esther doesn't have any of those things, but what Esther has is this story wherein we find the character of God. We find the way that a story changes our lives. We also are living in a larger than life story, and it is imperative, I think, that we understand our place in it. I think it's just tragic when we don't. In fact, I would venture to say that every spiritual leader we see who has fallen publicly, who has fallen with money or with sex or with addiction or whatever, has essentially first lost their place in the plot line of the story of God. King Xerxes is a man who has well and truly lost his place in his story. He does not know what he is there for. If he had his place in the plot line, there would be no 6-month party. He's busy. He's doing the work. Esther is someone who's still discovering her place in the story. She's still figuring it out. Do I say I'm a Jew? Do I not say I'm a Jew? Do I go before the king? Do I not go before the king? She is trying to find her place in a really big story that is over her head. And Mordecai is someone who is certain of his place in the story. Everyone who talks about him knows he is Mordecai the Jew. They know exactly where he fits in the story of Susa. They know that he is from the families of exiles. They know that he's not in a power position. He lives out his place in the story. And it is so, in nearly every story, you'll find these players and you'll find yourself among them. There's usually a villain. There's usually an inciting incident. And what I find is that there is our stories going on, our little temporary finite stories. And then there's this big story of God running all around us, this eternal timeline. When we plot the story of the Bible on a timeline, it is straight and true. We don't find God wringing his hands over the response of humankind. We find him steady in his determination to create and restore and redeem. And so the point is not for me to write myself a great story. The point is for me to say, Jesus, this also is your story. And how can it intersect with the timeline of what you're doing in your world? How can my story serve your story? How can I become a bit player in your story rather than the star in my own? And so things I think we learn from Esther about what it means to live out a truly epic story in which you get to be victorious are these. The first one is God is writing a story even when we can't see his pen. Stories are happening all around us, and the story is always bigger than us. We're in the middle of this. It's not finished yet. But remember, whoever you bow to is the main character in your story. So I feel like what's going on is always right in my frame of vision. Like, this is what's happening today. Today it's a bill, or it's a conflict, or it's an enemy, or it's the war in Ukraine, or it's a whatever. You just get so caught up in the story right here that you miss that God is at work in every single story, in every day of your life, in everything you're doing. If you let him, God is going to be at work in it. It's not so much the story of how Bo lives out her entire life. It's maybe the story of how does Bo go to Costco? How does she live inside the framework of the story of God when things don't go her way? When there's a line that's longer than she wants it to be? when chicken's too expensive? How do we live out our story in the little stories of our life? How do we connect to what God is doing at Costco, to what God is doing this morning at Horizon? How do we connect to that? Because it is so tempting and so easy to lose your place in the plot. It is so easy, but God is writing a story, even when we can't see it. The other thing is that whatever we bring to his story is multiplied for his glory. I can hoard all my stuff in the story of Bo, or I can bring my stuff to the story of God. In the story of Bo, all my gifts and talents and things may stack up this high. And in the story of God, it seems really tiny, like compared to everything else. But when you give it to him, it's multiplied in these incredible ways. There was a time where the staff at the church I was at had gone through a big spiritual gifts, personality profile seminar thing. And so it essentially had been 3 days of self-focus, looking at myself and my gifts and my things. And these are what motivate me. And this is how I'm going to change the world. And here are my labels that I wear in Christendom. And I went to farmer's market on a Saturday. It was in Bend. Farmer's market is in our hospital grounds outside. And so I just wanted some zucchini. And I went, and while I was there, I felt this little nudge, those little things where it's like God's moving his pen onto your page, and you're like, I just want to get home. And he says to me, Dorothy is in the hospital. You should go see her. Dorothy was a woman from our church, and she was quite old, in her late 80s, I think, and she was dying. She's in the hospital dying, and I, at that point, was really afraid of hospitals. I'm not anymore, but I was then, and I did not want to go in there. And so I argued, and I justified, and I did all kinds of things, but finally I ended up in Dorothy's room, and when I walked in, she was just like, she was first asleep, and she saw me, and she was like, I can't believe you've come. And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't have missed it, Dorothy. Of course I'm here. And so we talk about her life. She tells me about her husband who had gone to be with Jesus long before her, and she had loved him so much. She tells me about her life as an RN. She told me about so many things. And at the end, I prayed with her, and I felt heaven pressing in. And I looked at her and I said, it has been so good to be with you, Dorothy. And she looked at me and she said, it has been so good to be with you, Mary. My name's not Mary. She didn't know who I was. And I do know who she thought I was. Mary had been the pastor's wife at my church years before when Dorothy was young, and had since moved to Africa. And so please imagine the kind of God, as he writes the last pages of Dorothy's story, decides, I'm going to send Mary from Africa to see her. And my point in that story is that I have gotten to do a lot of things with my life. I have gotten to stand on a lot of stages. I've gotten to write some books. I've gotten to do a lot of things. But I would label that as one of the top 5 moments of my life. And she didn't know who I was. Because all the gifts, all the things, what books did Bo write, doesn't matter as much as did you go to the hospital. The story of Bo goes to farmer's market is better, it turns out, than a lot of the other stories that I've written with my own pen. And so knowing that we just bring him this, I bring him my I don't like hospitals, and he says, how about I multiply that and make it something better for your story and for hers? And then finally, we are supporting players, serving him and helping other people find their place in the story of God. So in 5th grade, my teacher decided that we would do a play for our parents. And she decided we're not just going to do any play. Anyone can do Charlotte's Web. We're going to do a cool one that they will love. We're going to do Julius Caesar. Just imagine the fifth graders in their little togas and stuff. And we were all like, oh my goodness, we can't do Julius Caesar. We're fifth graders. And she said, no, it's okay, because all you have to do is know what line comes before your line and then say your line. You only have to know this line and your line. And so we get ready to do the play and we practice. Well, I didn't actually practice because I didn't have a role in it because she said I was too gifted. And so my role was actually to be behind. Remember those giant chalkboards, freestanding chalk? We probably still have them. I don't know. It's been 1,000,000 years for me. But giant chalkboard that was actually green. And my job was to sit behind it with the script. And in the off chance that somebody didn't know a line, my job was to whisper the line. And so the star of the play was a guy named Richard Newell, and he was really good at math, which is probably mostly what you need to know. And so when it came time for him to say his line, he just, deer in the headlights, lost it, man. That guy was busted. He could not remember a single line, and so I'm whispering. And then what happens when one guy can't remember his line? And everyone has been trained to only know the line before you. It's just like dominoes falling. It's a tragedy. And I'm whispering the lines, and we get finally to the end of Julius Caesar. And I am like, we did it. We're through it. Nobody's the wiser. And I thought truly we pulled it off until I walked out from behind the chalkboard and got my first ever standing ovation. Yeah, they had heard me whispering every single line. And the thing is that we knew the lines. And we knew where to say them. But none of us knew the story. We didn't know the story. We didn't know the plot. We didn't know the characters. We didn't know what was going on in Julius Caesar. And it is so easy to memorize the lines and not know the story. So easy to throw out opinions, doctrine, judgments. These are the lines I've been taught to say because this is how we stay in community. And we can miss entirely the story of love and grace and scandalous redemption that brought us to the table. And we can think I was drawn in by this story of grace, so compelling and beautiful and alive, but somebody else will definitely be swayed by my list of rules. I love the story of Esther and a king and redemption and all of those things, but somebody else is really longing for the dishwasher manual. We are a part of a story, and we are only victorious in it as we know the plot line and our place in it. We have to know our place in it. Worship team, you can come back on up. I want my life to tell a better story. I wanted to tell a better story than she knew the rules and followed them. She knew a lot about the Bible. She quoted lots of verses. She loved archaeology. I wanted to tell a better story than she had lots of opinions. I want people to say that she lived out the story of redemption, the story of outrageous, unstoppable love. I want the story to say that she always, always bowed to the grace of Jesus, and that became the star of the story. In that, it's the only thing I can see, the only definition I can find that looks like victory. It's the only one. Is if I get to the end of this all, and I know that I lived it out. I know I lived out the story. My mother-in-law is in a care facility and is dying. My husband has been spending countless hours with her. And she's this beautiful Irish Catholic woman. And so probably our theology wouldn't all match. But I walked into her room the other day and she's in so much pain, so ready to go. In fact, her daughter was with her, and she said to her, she closed her eyes and she said, I'm going home now. This is it. And her daughter touched her hand and she goes, Mom, you're still warm. And she said, shoot. Shoot. And I walked in the other day and she looked at me and she said, Bo, please pray with me. And so my Protestant hand joined her Catholic hand. And we came to the very same God. And the only line that came to me was, all the days ordained for Loretta were written in your book before even one of them came to be. I don't even know how to end this. I only know that every one of you, every single one of you has the chance, the opportunity to sit in the middle of an epic story. Moms, if you were here today saying, I blew it with my kids, that story is like if you look at your children and say, that's a story about me being a bad mom, stop it. Be willing to say, I am going to trust the power of Jesus and the pen of Jesus to write a beautiful story for my children and for me. I'm going to trust him to step into this. I'm going to trust him that this story is not about me, not even the failures. This is not about me. This is about his grace and his love, and it never changes, and it is going to win the day. This is a time, I think, for the church to say, Jesus, pull us back to the plot line of redemption. Psalm 107 says, let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. A story of grace and redemption and freedom and love. Maybe it's time to put the instruction manuals away and just tell a better story.